Ever since he stepped down as a member of parliament before the last election, didn't run in the election, Charlie Angus has been barnstorming the country, raising awareness of the Maple MAGA, the what's going on in the United States, and basically arguing for Canadians to get engaged in politics and put pressure on their governments to change policies. So I'm going to talk to him as I always enjoy doing. Charlie, welcome to the interview.
Thanks so much for having me on.
There are many, many things that we could talk about and will, but let's start with your Substack essay of a few days ago called "The Pipeline to Nowhere." This is something Energy Media has been on and on about. I don't know how many stories and essays we've done. Give me your argument against it.
Well, I think what's really concerning is that obviously Northern Gateway is a disaster. It's never going to get built. But the idea that the Prime Minister went in with Daniel Smith to get this MOU has now alienated Premier Eby, basically thrown him under the bus, said, well, you have to deal with this. I mean, Eby has been a really strong advocate for a pro-Canada position. Mark Carney has completely alienated the First Nations, something he can't really afford to do if he's going to get projects through. He's lost his Quebec lieutenant, who's not being quiet, who's speaking up. He's really rattled his Liberal base. But on top of that is the complete walking away of all of the efforts that the Trudeau government put in after doing TMX pipeline to hold some level of accountability for the oil industry with their massive emissions, their refusal to be good corporate citizens. He's given them a free pass. And what did he get out of it? I mean, Daniel Smith's already walked on the deal pretty much. I mean, her base booed her when she announced she had a pipeline. They don't want a pipeline. They want to fight. She's already now going to start fighting with Carney about public health care. This is going to cost the Carney government seriously.
I think one of the problems here, Charlie, is that Carney doesn't understand Smith. And Smith is essentially bargains in bad faith, cannot be trusted. Like, if I make a deal with you, Charlie, and I shake your hand, done deal. I hold up my end of the bargain, you hold up your end of the bargain. You shake Danielle Smith's hand and make a deal, and the one thing you will be expected to deliver, and she will be busy behind the scenes undermining the very agreement that she just signed on to.
Well, I think that's the thing. It's that people are really frightened right now, and they desperately want our Prime Minister to do well. I desperately want our Prime Minister to do well. I've been sort of laying out warning things about this pipeline for a long time, and sucking up or cozying up to Daniel Smith because she is a political arsonist. She has no intention of doing the right thing, and Albertans can tell you clearly how she operates. But I think there was a naivety on Carney's part, which is concerning. But also what I hear from Canadians all the time is, trust the Prime Minister. He's playing three-dimensional chess. Someone said to me yesterday, he's playing five-dimensional chess. That this was actually a way of exposing Daniel Smith, blah, 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 blah. Daniel Smith is a very dangerous politician because she knows her main objective is chaos, and she knows how to get it. And, just on this issue of three-dimensional chess, I read Sarah Kenzier's book, Hiding in Plain Sight with Donald Trump. And she said, when things are desperate, we want our politicians, we want a savior. And so we keep telling ourselves when they do stuff we don't understand that they're playing three-dimensional chess. And I was shocked when I saw that she had actually referenced that. And she said, often what they're just doing are moving pawns. And in Canada, if you don't know what to do, the easiest pawn to move is to promise something to the big oil industry, and you'll get all the National Post and everybody on side for a day, and it'll look like you're doing something. I think the Prime Minister played the wrong pawn because it's already cost him a rook.
Charlie, I agree with you to some extent, but I have to say that the Prime Minister's choice of Tim Hodgson as Energy Minister is a huge tell here. Because, and for folks who don't know, Tim Hodgson worked with Carney at Goldman Sachs early on in their careers, like late 80s and early 90s. They worked together for 15 years. Hodgson went on to become the CEO of Goldman Sachs Canada. And this guy has a reputation as a deal maker. He is a private investment banker. He is deeply embedded in the natural resources industry, including oil and gas. And when Carney brought him on, it was because his reputation as a bulldog deal maker. And you can see now why he did that, because there are all these deals that he's lining up for various things, including the pipeline MOU, and it's going to be Tim Hodgson's job to get it done. And that worries me because Hodgson has all of the political finesse of a hammer.
Well, I actually think Hodgson has to go because he's not going to get these deals through. I mean, when the coastal BC First Nations started asking for a meeting and he ignored them until what they announced the deal on Wednesday, he called them back on Tuesday and said, I'll meet you on Friday. And then when they said, well, how can we be there? And he said, well, it's Zoom. Can you imagine him saying that to anybody else? And this disregard for First Nations, Carney made that mistake on Bill C5. And, I started to speak up about it then, and people are like, trust Carney, he's got the vision, blah, blah, blah. But I will agree that Prime Minister Carney is the smartest man in the room. The problem is the room he was in another country for 10 years. He was in the UK. He was not here when the big battles went down on Northern Gateway. He wasn't here during Idle No More. He hasn't seen what Trudeau went through in understanding the need to do reconciliation and to do it right. So to put Hodgson in there and to blow off Indigenous nations and say, well, you can do it by Zoom after the fact, I think to me, it's as poisoned the water as badly as when Doug Ford said to Indigenous nations in Treaty 9, I'll drive the bulldozer to the Ring of Fire, and the Ring of Fire hasn't moved since then. So Carney needs to realize putting a Goldman Sachs banker in to show complete disregard for these are nation issues here. These are fundamental, and Indigenous communities are not going back to the Stephen Harper days. The fight's been too long and too big. So this is a needless fight because Northern Gateway was never going to get built. Or he could have said, well, here, Daniel Smith, when you bring a private investor, when you've got blah, 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 come and we'll talk. That would have been a reasonable thing to do, and he would have put it on her lap, but instead now it's all in his lap.
And in fact, that's what he had done. That was, like months ago, that was exactly what he said. He said, there's no private proponent. You bring a proponent forward, and then we'll look at it, at making it, we'll consider it for a project of national interest. And there was no need for an MOU. But I want to talk about something else, Charlie, you just brought up a second ago. And that is Canadians need to get behind Carney because they feel like they need a savior, they need security, they're feeling anxious and insecure. And the reason I bring this up is I just wrote an essay this morning, published it on Substack, and the whole point of it was, it's not my job to champion Mark Carney. I like the guy. I really do. I'm with you on this. We need him to be good. Poilievre was an absolute disaster on the energy file. The NDP, I would agree, is completely disorganized. It's Carney or nothing is what we've got. And it's my job as a journalist to hold him to account, to point out that there is no long-term demand for heavy crude oil in Asia. Or in Europe for that matter, to point out that there's declining demand for LNG, or will be after 2030, on and on and on. There's a whole range of issues, and it's my job to do that, not to get behind and cheerlead on Mark Carney. And as much as my audience loves Mark Carney, I'm sorry, I follow the evidence, and the evidence doesn't support the direction in which he's going.
Well, I think the way I'm coming at it, again, I've been in opposition my whole life. I'm not a liberal. I don't support bankers. The idea of smart politicians leading the country. I saw Michael Ignatieff, smart guy, terrible politician. I saw Stéphane Dion, super smart guy. You could walk around him easily in a debate because he didn't get politics. A guy like Jean Chrétien got politics. I think what's concerning right now is that we don't have a proper balanced democracy. We have an extremist party in Poilievre's people. They're running on crazy, dumbass things of race and fighting diversity, and Jamil Javani's our new hero. So they will burn the house to the ground at a time when we need an opposition party to ask tough questions. The New Democrats are in disarray since what happened in the election, and they're not sitting at committee. So I think it falls to ordinary people, as ordinary people have done throughout this crisis with Trump. Ordinary people have stepped up. Ordinary people also have to be the guardrail on Mark Carney to say, we'll support you, Prime Minister. We understand what you're doing on the global stage, but on the national stage, you cannot be taking on these projects that divide us from each other, that create chaos, and will ultimately lead to the fall of your government based on the cards that you're playing. So we can do it respectfully, but we have to be, and ordinary people have to be the ones calling it out and saying, no, Northern Gateway is not going to happen. So why are we being suckered into this fight with Danielle Smith as she's already moving on to other arson targets?
We'll talk about whether or not the pipeline will get built in a minute, because I have some thoughts on that I did put them in an essay not too long ago. But here's I wanted to bring up another point, and that is the project that we're working on now. And for viewers who aren't familiar with this, on our YouTube channel, you can go and find the playlist that says Trump, Canada, and Project 2025. So, Charlie, what we're doing is there is an article in September 5th of Foreign Affairs, written by Russell Muirhead of Dartmouth College and I forget her first name, but Professor Rosenblum from Harvard, and it's called Ungoverned or Ungoverning.
Yeah.
And so the thesis here is that Trump has no intention of governing. He's no intention of working the machinery of government, the federal level in the United States, to make it work for ordinary people. He's there to break it. He's there to break it. And my point is, once we understand what Trump is up to, this ungoverning strategy, the parallels between Danielle Smith are very stark. In fact, yesterday I did an interview with Professor Dwayne Bratt from Mount Royal University. Dwayne is not an alarmist, believe me. He would not sit on your side of the floor in the House of Commons, Charlie. But even he is starting to talk about Smith as an authoritarian and recognizing that her style is very much like Trump's. It is the Maple MAGA that you talk about all the time. And I think that is critical for Canadians to understand we are not in the politics of our parents. This is a whole new game.
No, absolutely. And I think that this is why we have to really be focused right now. Danielle Smith was not working in the interests of Alberta's oil sector, and Alberta's oil sector have not been working in the interests of Canada. They're making fortune right now. We're cutting deals with them that are completely unnecessary. For example, giving them a break on the methane regs. Canada spent millions of taxpayers' money to help clean up the methane problem in the oil patch, and that money was spent on oil production. You know, methane is a planet killer. It's 80 times more dangerous than the CO2 emissions for the planet. So Carney could have said to big oil, listen, you want a deal? You deal with methane. It's been sitting out there for too long. We have the regs, you meet those regs. Instead, we gave him a break. What was that break for? What did we get? We got nothing out of it. When I look at, the damage that's happening in the lumber sector, again, under David Eby's watch, we're getting hammered. He's getting hammered. He could have been saying to the Prime Minister, what about the deals for lumber? What are you going to give to us? We're seeing in my region, 1,000 layoffs in the steel plants. We're seeing auto under crisis. And yet the crisis to be dealt with right now was Suncor and Imperial and another pipeline, all because we have a MAGA premier who does not care about the nation. She's made it clear she is not on Team Canada. She's thrown Carney under the bus already. Now she's fighting about the buyback on guns, which has nothing to do with her jurisdiction. She's fighting on public health care. And she's also, 15 recalls facing UCP because Albertans are fed up, and she's facing recall, and she'll change the law on that because, as you say, she's not a Democrat. She'll use whatever tactics she can to stay in power. And we just need to be aware of that. And I think Carney needs to take his message to Canadians. And I think he needs to take his message to ordinary Albertans. They understand this. They get this. They're dealing with her. This MOU, I think she's been laughing ever since.
One of the things that's become very plain to me after going through the MOU, interviewing experts, talking about some of the issues, because this is the stuff we report on all the time, is how she's going to play this to her advantage while giving up nothing. And one of the examples is this idea of the industrial emitters carbon tax, which was really central. This was seen as the main get for Canada. And I don't know how Carney missed this, Charlie. I really don't. And Hodgson should be smacked upside the head because he clearly missed it. what Danielle Smith has done over the last, since 2022, when the last equivalency agreement was negotiated between Alberta and Canada, is essentially wreck the carbon market in Alberta. So while you may have a headline price of $95 for a ton of CO2 equivalent, in effect, because she's flooded, her government has flooded the carbon market with credits, the effective price, it was $24. Okay, a fraction. And yesterday, she introduced another regulation called the direct investment credit, which will, according to economist Dave Sawyer, drive it down below $20. So not only did she just, a week ago commit to $130 a ton, now she's behind the scenes where nobody can see her. Nobody except for, geeks like Dave and I, don't know what she's doing. She's basically undermining the very principles that she agreed to.
Yeah. I think what's also concerning, just looking at it from the real politic of it, she wins either way. Yeah. She wins if they get rid of the tanker ban, and Carney takes all the heat, and she wins if they keep it in place, because she'll say that the Liberals betrayed Alberta. This is the playbook. And that's what concerns me, is that this is not being done with a larger vision of the nation, not being done economically with a vision. So guys like Hodgson's, like what? They're smart Goldman Sachs bankers. I mean, they've often said Canada was 3 oligarchs in a trench coat. You would think that a guy that's brought in there is going to have that big vision thing. It's like, what are we going to do? Where are we going to focus right now? We need to be focused on dramatically shifting our economy. We see the new report from Trump, or the new statement of Trump on his global security vision, where Canada is reduced to a vassal state with gunboat diplomacy to keep us in line. And so we put all that effort into the oil patch. Like, what was the political upside of that? The prime minister is going to spend more and more time having to deal and explain that decision, while Danielle Smith continues to burn them, while the nation is scrambling to have a vision for how we're going to get out from underneath this MAGA threat. So this has been a disaster on all fronts.
Let me explain one of the consequences, because this is interesting. I was approached a couple of months ago by a group called the Northern Native Coalition out of northern BC, and it's got some Alberta connections as well. And what they came up with, Charlie, was a way to take dilbit as it comes down from Fort McMurray into Hardisty, and there's a diluent recovery unit, which basically takes the diluent out of the bitumen. Then what they do is they have a patented bitupod, they call it. So it's like half a shipping container, and they pack the bitumen in, and then they close up the container, and they get 3 of them at a time, where one would sit, and then they want to ship it over to Asia and Europe for road building as asphalt binder. It's a non-combustion use for bitumen. So they came to me and they said, Markham, you've done work on this for years and years, and you understand the technical part. We want to give you this exclusive. And we ran the story last week. But here's the thing, Charlie, that I'm leading up to. They want to be declared a project of national interest. Ottawa won't listen. Because all they can think about, Hodgson and Carney, is that pipeline, and any other project that might compete with it is off the table. Smith will not listen to them either, for exactly the same reason. So what this pipeline has done, this MOU has done, it sucked all of the oxygen out of the room, so that other innovations around energy, around bitumen, around whatever it might be, get no oxygen. And that is, if you're cutting off innovation to do an old school 20th century infrastructure project, that's a failure of policy, a failure of strategy, a failure of vision when you're leading the country.
Well, that's a really good point. But what I was expecting when I saw the MOU. I was expecting that Carney was going to pull the rabbit out of the hat and say, okay, Daniel Smith, you want a pipeline? We want to know where you stand with clean energy. I mean, Alberta was set to lead the country, perhaps the world, in clean energy projects, and Daniel Smith shut it down for ideological purposes. The same way they're not going to let bitumen be used for anything except burning. It's ideological. So the prime minister had an opportunity to say, let's talk about the vision, because are we really saying that where we're going to be now in 2026 is we are going all in on big oil? I mean, Mark Carney was the guy 10 years ago who warned the planet, that we were in this existential threat, that there was going to be stranded assets. And, we all thought, well, things are going to change when Mark Carney comes in. And so was he just using that language because it was fun then? And 10 years ago, Suncor, that when they'd come to committees, they'd talk about their green strategy and their diversification and their blah, 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 blah. You hear none of that now, none of that. So even the companies, they could have said, listen, we want to use bitumen for a number of purposes. We want to diversify. There's so much we could use coming out of Fort Mac, and then it would confuse environmentalists and would change up the argument. But no, it's straight focus all the time. They want another they want another pipeline, they want to burn it. And then you have Carney saying it's going to be decarbonized oil. That's like saying you're going to drink your way to sobriety.
I actually have an explanation for what's driving the industry here, Charlie. So since 2020 was the beginning of the pandemic, and the economy went in the toilet, the global economy, and so did the profits for oil companies. They had a bad couple of years, but that was just the cherry on the sundae, because really oil and gas has underperformed other sectors of the economy, like tech, for example, for a long time. So investors came to the oil companies and said, look, man, you guys are not giving us the returns that we want. So we now want every cent of free cash flow that you generate. 100% of it, we want it all. And we want you to save money any place you can, and that money, we want it. And if the companies want access to capital going forward to do, whatever the projects they have to do, they need sustaining capital, the industry does. They have to give the investors what they want. Otherwise, their shares will tank, the executives will lose their jobs, et cetera, right? And so that is driving the companies have retreated from all of the stuff that they used to do before, because investors are driving them, demanding that they do that.
Well, for sure. But the other issue as well is, like, remember when we brought in the greenwashing regs and they lost their minds? And now Carney's gotten rid of the greenwashing regs. It's like, since when has it been okay to lie as an industry? I can't, a mining company can't pump waste into the water in Ontario, even under Doug Ford, and claim that they're making the water cleaner. Yet, these front groups for oil and gas are running these massive campaigns. And I know when I spoke up against it, I was getting constant death threats. So again, like, this is about social license. This is about social responsibility. These companies can say, yeah, we want you to throw out all your greenwashing promises. We want to throw out all your diversification efforts, and we want to make money. Well, there are issues of accountability. And that's where federal regulations and provincial regulations should be in place to say, you guys are making a whack ton of money right now. These are your obligations as good corporate citizens. But right now there are no obligations, and we've given them more. And what are we getting out of it? We're going to just get a national fight that's going to just go nowhere.
We've been arguing here for a long, long time that the Canadian oil industry's vision of the future is not driven by data. It's not driven by modeling. It's driven by narrative. Yeah. They have basically bought OPEC's narrative. We call it here the oil and gas forever narrative. So OPEC says that in 2050, you'll see 120 million barrels a day of oil demand compared to 103 today. So that's like 17 million barrels a day of growth. That's a lot of growth. And so the Canadian industry looks at that and goes, well, we want our share of it, right? We want a quarter of it, a third of it, whatever. And we want to be, and this is why Smith says we want to double oil production in Alberta, because Canada's number four in oil production in the world. And what we've got here, Charlie, is a bunch of frustrated masters of the universe. They look at Russia and Saudi Arabia, who are basically tied for number two behind the US in oil production, and they go, why aren't we there? Why is it them? Why aren't we number two or whatever, with all the wealth that comes along with that, with all the political clout that comes along with that? And they feel that they've been artificially constrained by the Laurentian elite, by Canada not giving them the pipeline egress that they need. And this is their opportunity. It hasn't come along in decades, but it is here now, they think, in order to get the pipelines, to get their product to market where it'll be welcomed with open arms, and they will be the next sheikhs. That's what they want.
Yeah, and they expect us to pay for it. I mean, we pay for TMX. We're paying for the what the subsidy to ship every barrel down. I mean, these are not businessmen. These are people who believe that we should pay them, let them do what they want. And meanwhile, when you ask them about environmental responsibility, they have nothing to say about the crisis. I mean, we used to have summer. We now have fire season. I left Northern Ontario in October to the smell of burning fires. I landed in Saskatchewan that week in October to the smell of burning fires. There is a responsibility for this, and you see no accountability, no efforts on terms of emissions. The rest of the country are lowering emissions. These guys aren't. And now we just cut them a break. So again, what is the Prime Minister saying in this time of national crisis? Because the global planet crisis is part of the national crisis. These guys have not, and I've met with them. I meet with the mining industry all the time. I pushed mining industry hard. Maybe in the rest of the world, Canadian companies, well, they don't have a very good reputation, but they've been stepping up to some degree here. What we've seen out of the oil patches, they're stepping away from that, from where they were 10 years ago. And that's just not good enough. That is not acceptable, especially if you're turning around and saying, oh, by the way, can you get rid of the tanker ban? Why would anybody do that?
I reported on that extensively back in the day, and I can tell you, Charlie, here's a little anecdote that maybe you didn't know about. In 2014, in September of 2014, 5 oil sands CEOs, including Shell and Murray Edwards and some other very well-known names, met at a Calgary restaurant with 5 environmental groups, including environmental defense. There were a bunch of them. Zipporah Berman chaired the group for the environmentalists, and Dave Collier, the former head of Shell Canada and the head of CAP, chaired the industry groups. Over the course of 6 or 8 months of negotiations, they came to a peace in the valley agreement, a handshake deal where the company said, we recognize the world is changing. We need to be carbon and cost competitive. We get that. And so they actually supported and had input into Rachel Notley's climate leadership plan from 2015 because of that handshake deal. And the government knew about it. Shannon Phillips, former Minister of Environment, interviewed, told me all about this. Here's what happened. Once those 4 oil sands CEOs were on the stage behind Notley when she announced it, it started a very quiet civil war inside the Alberta oil industry. And it went on for 2 or 3 years, and the regressive Jason Kenney oriented community inside the oil industry won. And every one of those oil CEOs left. They got pushed out, fired, they got whatever. And in came people like Rich Kruger, the old crew, with their, very, very conservative, very profit oriented. We're not doing any hydrogen and wind and solar and any of that kind of stuff. And nobody talks about that civil war. But I had enough interviews with people inside the industry to know what was going on. And that's why we're where we're at today. Is Jason Kenney became premier in part, and because of the oil industry wanted him there as an antidote to Notley, and Smith is the water carrier for the oil and gas industry.
Right. No, that's very accurate. I mean, again, I studied I know the mining industry super well, and what we've seen over the last 10 years is an understanding that they had to really pick up their game. and they had to actually follow through on commitments because the projects just weren't going to go ahead. But what we're seeing in this kind of pressure from Smith at this time is they'll throw a whole whack ton of money, suck up all our resources, and again, it's only going to create social conflict because these companies, we don't have those people who sat around the table, back in Shannon Phillips days. And, some of those guys used to come and talk to me and say, Charlie, you're being hard on us. This is what we're doing. Well, that's what I expect as a member of parliament. I'm going to be hard on you. You come meet me. You tell me what you're doing. I meet with mining companies all the time. They would say, this is what we're doing. You get to push them. After a while, once the new crew came in, it was like a stone wall. They didn't figure they had to explain. Well, I think they have to explain. And this is what Carney has tied himself to. And Hodgson, this is his crew probably, but it is not going to end well. I think Carney has to find a way to walk this back. He's not going to. He's a very proud man. He thinks he's the smartest guy in the room, but this is a bigger issue than a pipeline.
Speaking of, this is a good segue into what I think is one of the reasons why Carney did what he did. Carney, and some of this is partly his own fault, the way he positioned himself politically, bringing in Hodgson. But he has said for a long time, Canada is broken. It can't build anything anymore. So when he responded to Trump and he said, we're going to build, remember that? Build. One of the things that happened is that Bay Street and Wall Street, their ears perked up. And they said, okay, all right, you've said that you want private capital. We are private capital. We now need you to show us that you can build, that you can, roll back regulations, or you can subsidize, or whatever it is that you're going to do. You have to show us. And I think what Carney has done is he has tried to make the pipeline and LNG on the West Coast the poster child to show Wall Street, hey, we're back in business. We can build. Watch us. And I think that had he not done the MOU, had he not, and I'm thinking, that this is the way I think he thinks, that the people in Wall Street and Bay Street would have gone, oh, no, they still haven't got it. Carney couldn't do it, and his grand strategy would have been in danger. That's my hypothesis.
Well, I think the problem with that, though, is that if you're saying that Canada can't build, so pick the project that is most likely to fail, that is going to get the biggest opposition, and put all your chips on that and show the world what's going to happen. I mean, there's easily a dozen projects, say in mining, they could go right now. He announced the Crawford Nickel mine. I used to bug Minister Wilkinson about Crawford Nickel. It's 12 kilometers outside of Timmins. So it's right in the heart of mining country. It's right beside a smelter operation that's shutting down. It's right beside a rail line. So it needs investment, but it's a massive nickel deposit. Boom, up and running. Are you going to have a problem with First Nations there? No, because they're going to sign the agreements. You're going to get that. Vale, huge nickel and copper and critical minerals. It could be out of Thompson, which is suffering, or Sudbury. But they're going to play hardball. They're going to say, well, you got to give us some subsidies so that we can actually use mine credits to do shaft sinking, blah, blah, which I would normally never agree to. But heck, if we're going to give the kind of subsidies we're giving big oil, Valley's going to decide, are we going to do critical minerals in Canada or Malaysia or Indonesia? These are projects that can happen. Blast furnaces in Labrador with clean energy so that we can export increased iron. There's easily a dozen projects that he could put on the table tomorrow and say, these are going ahead now. That one is not going ahead. So he's just sending a message to Wall Street. Canada's not going to build this. Come and watch the fallout.
Charlie, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the work that we do here at Energy Media is all about, we spend half our time reporting on the global energy transition, what's happening in China, what's happening in Europe, what's happening in other Asian countries as they electrify. And we have said, I don't know how long, we need to have an energy strategy, an economic strategy that begins to pivot to that clean energy future while thinking strategically about our hydrocarbon resources. For bitumen, refining and burning bitumen is the dumbest possible, lowest value thing that you could possibly do. Making materials is far, far, far superior. And what we should be doing is building that industry now so that in 10 years, once demand from the fuel side has begun to decline, we have a domestic market. We have another industry or two industry or three industries that then can take up the slack and create jobs and bring in investment, and we can continue to be prosperous. But this idea of doubling down on a 20th century industry is absolutely nuts. And again, I'm going to go back because I quote you all the time: three oligarchs in a trench coat, and the problem with incumbency. You and I have talked about this in previous interviews. Do not put incumbents in charge of of process and policy. That is the dumbest thing you can do, and apparently, that's Carney's strategy.
No, and I agree. And it's like the reason I really like your show is that, like, I think there's a way of talking about that. This is not environmentalist before versus industry. I mean, I have many people say, you're an environmentalist, why do you like mining? That doesn't make sense. And I said, well, because I'd rather we mine in Canada than we mine in the Democratic Republic of Congo with the terrific human rights abuses. So let's do it right. Let's do it smart. When I'm in Alberta, I always inspired by, people understand energy better than anywhere. And they understand the complexity of energy and the possibility. What we've got is we've got someone in Alberta who's stopping that energy transition. That energy transition is about jobs. It's about technology. It's about taking the lead. Instead, we're burning bitumen. Like, that's as good as it gets. That makes no sense. I think Prime Minister Carney needs to trust more and understand that we have an opportunity right now, because we're breaking away with the United States, an opportunity to do things better, and we have to do things better.
Charlie, you sat in the House of Commons as a member of Parliament for what, 21 years?
21 years.
21 years. And so how that place works. Now, you will not be surprised to know that I have been contacted by people inside the government, inside Natural Resources Canada, to tell me what's going on. And the best way to describe it is that there is absolutely no interest in looking at what's going on outside of Canada. They say we're going to go for Asian markets. Yes. Have they done any studies? No. They don't know what the demand is. Will demand for oil, heavy crude oil, go up? Will it go down? Will it move over to China or India? They have no idea. What I'm being told is in that department, it's drill, baby, drill. That's the culture under Hodgson. And anybody who doesn't agree with it, keep your head down, because you'll be out the door if you disagree with the direction the minister has set. And he couldn't do that. Hodgson couldn't do that without Carney's blessing.
Yeah. Wilkinson was an interesting choice, because Wilkinson was trying to straddle the two worlds. I was their relentless critic. I was on them all the time. That's why I got in that committee, was that we got serious about this energy transition. And, again, you need opposition members to bring the officials and ask the hard questions, like, what happened to all that federal money on methane? Where did you spend it? What? You spend it on job creation in the oil patch? I thought we were dealing with a planet killer. That's the questions you have to be able to ask that department. And they are very much driven by, Canada's got this thing, LNG. When I was in Europe meeting the Germans were like, we're moving beyond that. By the time you guys get your LNG up, we're going to have already transitioned. So you either offer us a transition or you're wasting our time. But, you just mentioned we're going to do LNG and it's going to be magical. And so we're going to throw all this money in. The officials are going to say this is brilliant. Where's it going to be in 20 years? It's a stranded asset. And it's also, none of them talk about the huge methane impacts. These are methane bombs. So that's what you need. You need a committee. You need those hard questions to say, are we really spending this? What's the plan? What have you thought? Where's the market? Because if it's not there, it doesn't make sense. But when you don't have a balanced democracy, like we don't have now, we have conservatives just burning the house to the ground. The Bloc, you just can't trust them on anything. The NDP are not sitting at committee. And Carney's, it's my way or the highway. This is not a sign of this is not a good sign for moving forward.
I want to talk about LNG for a while, because we have done the work. I've interviewed global LNG experts, and the the concerted message that I get back from them about what's going to happen between now and 2050 is uncertainty. Yeah, how uncertain it is. And the further out you go to 2050, it gets to be really, really uncertain. Now, why is that? Well, first of all, and I can't believe that Canada doesn't talk about this publicly, but we know that between 2026 and 2028, the global suppliers, including mostly Qatar, the US, and Australia, with a little bit from Canada, will be bringing on 300 billion cubic meters of new LNG capacity into the market, into the global market. What is the current market? 585 billion cubic meters a year. So basically 50% more supply is coming in. And the IEA looked at that and said, we don't have a home for 185 billion cubic meters of LNG. There's no market for it. But it's already, they're building the plants, or they're bringing the plants online. How in a market like that could you possibly think, as the Prime Minister did just 2 to 3 weeks ago, and he say, I want to have 5 to 6 to 7 times as much LNG by 2035 as we have today? It doesn't jibe with the evidence. And I don't know how a guy with his credentials could not know that.
I'll flip that and say that I think a prime minister knows that in Canada, to actually say there is no market for LNG will just cause everyone to lose their minds. I mean, this drumbeat. The Conservatives just pound it again and again and again. Our talking heads pound it again and again and again, but the numbers aren't there. And so what ends up happening with politicians is they go along because it sounds good, even though it is an absolute boondoggle waste. It's also not the clean energy. That's why they had to get rid of the greenwashing regs, so that they can go back to lying about how clean it is, as they're going to spend all this money. And so even if Prime Minister Carney saw all that, does he have the political will to stand up and say, whoa, there's no economic case here? And this is what worries me. It's like, we need to put on the table a vision. And we need to have a grounded economic vision. And we need to say, we're going to make a lot of tough choices here. I think Canadians are more than ready to accept tough choices, to stand up, to create an independent country. So I would love to hear the Prime Minister talk to Canadians. He doesn't. This is my one piece of advice to him. We elected you as a wartime Prime Minister. Be that wartime Prime Minister. Explain to us why you're doing this. Canadians will have your back. But we're not hearing that. And I just think, again, we're going back to the three oligarchs in a trench coat of Canada politics, where we're going to blow staggering amounts of money on planet burning stuff that's not going to benefit us in the long term. And it's only going to cost political capital and do environmental damage.
Charlie, I'm going to give you the vision. Energy Media has got a 3-point vision for Canada's economic future, and I'm going to give it to you. And know that this has been vetted by economists and other experts that we've interviewed over the last 2-3 years. So here it is. Number one, the easiest way to create value, to create and to attract investment, is to add value to the natural resources you already export. And so you're talking about a smelter next to a nickel deposit in Timmins. You know very well that you want to smelt the nickel into a battery metal, which then goes into a battery cell, which then goes into a battery pack, which then goes into an electric vehicle. That's the battery supply chain. Take that example and apply it to bitumen, to natural gas, to timber, to lumber. Apply it to grains. Apply it to everything that we produce, our natural resources. Don't let it out of the country as a round log or a raw, oil and gas export. Don't do that. Okay, that's number one. Number two, electrify everything. Everything. Build out your power grid. On the supply side, because you got to produce like 2 to 3 times as much electricity by 2050. On the demand side is where the revolution is taking place. Electric transportation, heat pumps, industrial heat, all of those things are either the same cost or lower cost than a fossil fuel alternative. Electrify everything. You want to be competitive. You want to lower your costs. Electrify. Number three, build all the infrastructure to support 1 and 2. If we did that alone, without all, talking about tech and all the other things that you could talk about, but our vision alone would turn the economy around in a decade. And it would be consistent with everything we've talked about today. It would be consistent, ironically, with everything that Carney said or had said before he became prime minister. And it's doable. That's the thing. So there's the vision. There's the 3-point vision. Add value, electrify, build.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. We might look back on the Trudeau government, who I hammered relentlessly, as this golden moment that could have been, didn't quite deliver. But we spent a lot of time at committee talking about like the electrification transition. You're not going to build a grid from one end of the country to the other. You'll never get across Northern Ontario, but energy loops, finding, connections between Alberta, British Columbia, the Maritimes, Ontario has huge potential, to build out that infrastructure, would be a massive federal investment that if the provinces come on, then you're creating industrial jobs, then you're creating industrial opportunities because, Ontario, our industrial belt, if we had cheaper electricity, it's all there. And again, it's like you said about, nickel. We can create the nickel. We can create the nickel product alloys, the products. We were going to have a huge EV sector. Why not do that? Why bend to Donald Trump? Like, this is all stuff we can integrate. And the battery capacity, as you know, way more than me, the battery capacity now for storage is staggering. And yet we're doing the dumb, simplest things that really speak to 20th century technologies. This is where I'm hoping the prime minister, maybe in the next round, will say, this is my vision. Okay, I promised a pipeline. Now this is where my vision is. But if we don't have that vision, we're just going to muddle along. And I don't think we can afford to muddle along anymore.
I'll give Mark Carney this much credit, Charlie, and that is when I dug into the climate competitive strategy, which was part of Budget 2025 here 4 weeks ago. The germ of an idea is there. The germ of a strategy is there. If he can put all the pieces together, but more importantly, he needs, and this as a politician, if you have a vision for doing something differently, you need a constituency. As Ralph Klein used to say, politicians don't lead, they find a parade and get out in front of it. So there needs to be a vision and a parade created that, Carney can get out in front of and Hodgson can get out and implement and so on. And all we've got now, our vision and our parade is 3 oligarchs in a trench coat. Until we get beyond that, we are stuck in our stasis. That's where we're at.
We are. And those 3 oligarchs and their lobbyists have the ear. I heard the other day a really interesting story about Chrétien. The Chrétien had 10 people he called, and his staff had no idea who they were. They were all across the country. One was like a barber, one was like a truck driver or whatever. And he checked in on them. And he kept his pulse on where Canadians were based on what people outside the bubble and outside the lobbying zone said. And I think the prime minister could really use advisors to say, Mark, outside of cabinet, to say, Mark, why would you pick a fight with BC First Nations? This is nuts. Why not go back and say this? Or, to provide that vision thing. Well, why aren't we doing this? Like, there's a lot of smart people out there who would give that time and do it in a nonpartisan way. And it could just be off the record. Maybe he does, but right now it seems it's the 3 oligarchs in a trench coat and their lobbyists, and they brought one of the guys out of that trench coat and they put him in the charge of the ministry, which is Hodgson. So it's a dead end, and we can't afford a dead end. We can't afford this government not to succeed right now. Whether you like him, whether you don't, whether you hate liberals, whether you love them, whether you think he's the second coming of Jesus Christ. We can't afford to fail right now because MAGA is on us, and they're going to be on us if there's economic or political instability. So he needs to get this together, and he needs to get it together fast because that was a huge stumble. There's a crack in the hull of the good ship Carney, and they got to find a way to repair that crack.
Charlie, I want to run something by you. This is a pet hypothesis of mine because I interview a lot of economists. Energy economists are kind of the lifeblood of my interviews. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I can tell you is because I interview them all over the United States, all over Europe, particularly in the UK, like Oxford Institute of Energy Studies, that kind of stuff, and some who are in Asia. In those other countries, even in the United States under Trump, the amount of intellectual horsepower that's dedicated to the energy transition is phenomenal. You go into the United States, for example, the big national laboratories, which are just a crown jewel of that country, and they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of economists and engineers and analysts and all producing data and research so that policymakers understand the direction in which the economy is going, right? In which the energy system is going. You go over to the UK, I just mentioned one, and there's all kinds of other ones. Look at Canada. I could count the number of energy transition economists or energy economists who get what's going on one hand. One hand. And I'll tell you, Dr. Chris Bataille, who lives in Vancouver but is affiliated with the Columbia University, we've had this conversation. And I said, Chris, like, who amongst your colleagues gets this and provides input into the federal government, the BC government, whoever, wherever, so that policymakers and the chief bureaucrats understand the global context? And he said, nobody.
Yeah.
That is a major downfall, because if you don't have ideas, if you don't have understanding, if you can't analyze the data that's readily available, how are you going to understand what you need to do?
Well, when in my last session of Parliament, I asked to be on the Natural Resources Committee, which, one of my party people said, well, you've been in politics a long time, maybe as an elder, you could go for something like foreign affairs or blah, blah, why natural resource? I think that's where it all comes down. And I felt an urgency and an excitement that we could maybe move ahead. And, we spent 4 years talking about the tax credits for clean energy. And we were always just about to get it done. And in that 4 years, they built TMX pipeline. The Conservatives spent 50 hours screaming into microphones to stop the offshore Atlantic Accords about getting clean energy off the Atlantic coast. Now Newfoundland's saying oil's back. Like there was a moment where things could have been possible. I beat up on Stephen Guilbeault all the time because I knew that those 2030 targets we weren't going to hit, and I knew he knew it. Now he's saying we're definitely not going to hit it. I'm giving him a bit more credit now, is that maybe he thought, well, I'll just stay as long as I can. But there was a moment and an opportunity for Canada. And Daniel Smith played a big role in killing that, because there was a lot of excitement and energy in Alberta about that. As soon as those tax credits coming in, getting those projects off the ground, using that expertise, it's not good enough to go along and say, well, we're going to go. We think that those digital cameras and cell phones are a problem because we've got typewriters here in Canada, and we're damn right we're gonna use our typewriters because it is a thing to be proud and be proud Canadian and proud Westerner. We're going to stick with our typewriters. That's what it feels like.
Charlie, I've said this in previous interviews with you, but I'm going to say it again for the benefit of our viewers. When there's an innovative disruption in an industry, like there is in the energy industry in Canada, the incumbents have three choices. They can pivot to a different business model, something like, remember Danish Oil and Natural Gas? Mm-hmm. They pivoted to become Ørsted, so they can do that, completely different business model. They can re-engineer the business model they have. So like IBM, when I was in university, was nothing but a computer company, manufacturer, and now it doesn't make any computers. It just does services. So they can re-engineer what they do, or they can double down on the status quo. And what we've got are incumbents under threat, under pressure, because they're feeling, the price pressure, market changes, climate policy, all of that. What they've done is they've doubled down on the 20th century status quo, and then they've gone out and captured politicians and captured governments to support their agenda. And they are squeezing every penny of profit they can out of this before the collapse comes, and they're lying to Canadians about why. Lying, telling us that, 2050 is going to be lots of demand for oil, lots of demand for LNG, and there's no alternate voices. The National Post and the Globe and Mail are not going to be the alternate voices. The CBC even is not going to be an alternate voice. So where are the alternate voices? Well, it's people like you and me, and there's not many of us.
No, and right now, I remember when the Natural Resources Committee brought their Climate 50 plan, 2050 plan, and I said, well, how is it that we have as much oil production in 2050 as we do now? And then they hemmed and hawed, and I said, so is that net zero? And that was the plan that was happening under Trudeau. It was like the Natural Resources Department wasn't going to change their worldview, even as the IPCC is saying the planet's on fire, even as people are being burnt out, the crisis is here. And yet our 2050 plan was much oil now, in 2050 is now, no real transition, but somehow in the words, there was transition and clean energy and net zero, blah, blah. And now we're going to add an extra million barrels a day on top of, like, I don't know, they're talking about another 250,000 barrels through Enbridge. Like, so why are we even talking about a future?
Here's an alternate strategy to the 1 million barrel a day pipeline that Danielle Smith wants to build out to Prince Rupert. So first of all, if you're in a changing market, optimize what you have before you build anything new. So you mentioned Enbridge. It's actually 400,000 barrels a day. But on top of Enbridge's 400,000 barrels a day to the United States market, there are smaller pipelines that can add another 250,000 through optimize.
Yep.
That's 650. We now know that the Trans Mountain expansion, which the government owns, the federal government owns 100%, could be optimized for another 400,000 barrels a day. Right there is over 1 million barrels a day of new shipping capacity you don't have to build a pipeline to Prince Rupert. You optimize what you have. Then you could do what I've suggested for the Bitupod, the bitumen asphalt binder. You could do it for carbon fiber. You could do it for activated carbon. What about geothermal? Advanced geothermal based in Alberta is ready to scale up. There's so many other ways that you can get to the same end goal, but in a much less risky way, in a more clever way, a way that you're headed in the right, you're skating to where the puck is going, is basically what I'm saying, instead of skating to where the puck was, which is what our current strategy is.
Well, I think a lot of people thought the Prime Minister was going to pull these rabbits out of his hat, that he was going to say, listen, this is the deal I've made. We're going to support, again, they can optimize in so many areas. We're going to expect this. We're going to, in terms of obligations, and we want to see that Alberta is going to start to meet clean energy. We didn't get any of that. And so the question is going to come down, and I think it's all ideological. I think it's all about Danielle Smith saying they killed the tanker ban. I mean, this was Jason Kenney's bugbear. This was Stephen Harper. The tanker ban is what they want to kill because they want to own, BC. They want to own the woke. They want to blah, blah. And they put the Prime Minister in the box, and he can't kill that tanker ban. He loses, was it 15 or 20 BC seats? They're already starting to panic. It was just a dumb political play. So I don't know where he goes on this, though, because now we're locked in, and Danielle Smith wins either way. She doesn't need a pipeline. She's got a prime minister who failed to deliver if he doesn't deliver, and she will bang that drum until hopefully those recalls get rid of her and the rest of her gang.
I want to sketch out a possible scenario, and I did a video on this, folks, if you want to go to our YouTube channel just last week. And I asked the question, okay, you've got 4 groups that need to have a win, right? So you've got the obvious 2, Alberta and Canada. You've got the BC government, which right now is, sounding like a loser. And you've got BC First Nations, whether it's the Northern First Nations or whatever. So those 4 groups have to have a win. What do you do for David Eby and the BC government? Well, one of the things you do is he's a big fan of LNG. So if you do all the projects, I think I mentioned this earlier, you get $300 billion of capital expenditure. That could be Eby, where Eby goes, oh, I really don't want to do the pipeline, but I don't want to. But if you're going to give me $300 billion of investment, I'll reluctantly take it. What do you do with the BC First Nations? You say every project that comes in, LNG pipeline, gas pipeline, natural gas production up in northeastern BC and the Montney and the all of that has to have Indigenous equity. It can be 25%, 50%, 100%, whatever it is, but the First Nations in that BC area have to benefit. And by the way, we're going to publicly guarantee all of the loans that allow them to purchase that equity. And then so the BC First Nations look at that and go, whoa, economic reconciliation. We're going to be owners. We're going to finally build that Indigenous economy that we've been talking about for decades. And that's how you try to put it together. And maybe you just don't care of the fact that there's no demand over in Asia and Europe, and you just do it on the basis of politics.
Well, I think that's how they will try. But I think and I said this to someone in the Notley government when they were talking to me about the pipeline, and they said that we've got all these agreements with chiefs. And I said, you know what? When the grassroots step up, all those agreements mean nothing. This is a symbol. The BC Coast is a symbol. I remember the last round of Northern Gateway. It doesn't matter who signs on to any agreement. It is going to create a massive backlash. And we saw how quickly I Don't Know More rose up. It dissipated after, but it pretty much shook everybody. I think it's a symbol, and symbols matter. And so I think the Prime Minister's people probably are trying to be too smart here, and they think they're going to cut these kind of deals. I would bet against it. And I would bet that when people feel that something as sacred and symbolic to them as their water is put to threat, they will step up regardless of who they get to sign that agreement. So that's where that's been my experience in all my years of political battles and environmental battles. A big symbol like that, you're not going to be able to buy your way out of it.
I will agree with you that I don't think the LNG plants will be built, and I don't think the pipeline will be built. And I think it will be because there just isn't enough demand. And once the smart money gets to the table and says, okay, where are your customers?
Yeah.
And the Prime Minister and Hodgson and Eby and Smith, it doesn't matter who it is, can't identify your customers because there aren't any.
Yeah.
Charlie, did you know that over in Asia, there are 4 countries with explicit policies to end imports of oil and gas, and another 11 or 12 with implicit policies, including China? Why would you build a pipeline to serve that? It makes no sense. So sooner or later, when the smart money comes and asks the hard questions, which aren't being asked now, then I think things will start to fall apart. Here's my concern, and you'll understand this. In the meantime, while we're debating this, we're ripping apart the country because BC and Alberta will be at each other's throats.
That's the issue. That was the big mistake. The Prime Minister's smart enough to know this is a dead-end project, that there isn't a market, that it isn't going to transform the economy, but what it will do is suck up badly needed energy at a time when we really need a plan to deal with our, we hear from the parliamentary budget officer, he's cutting the plan on building houses. Well, could there have been a way of saying, listen, we've got all these lumber mills. We are going to subsidize whatever. We are going to use lumber. We are going to start to do a massive house build project. We're going to train people up. We're going to lower, whatever. There's got to be a smart, if you could put that much energy into a project as dumb as Northern Gateway, you can do smart things. And that's what we need right now, because this is a political, it's not even a dead end. This is a political trap that's going to suck way too much energy that will not be able to pull itself out of that trap. That's my concern at this time.
I honestly thought that Mark Carney was the leadership that would rise to an existential crisis. I really thought that. And now I don't think that anymore. I really worry that, in fact, Carney's leadership will be inadequate. The fact that he talks as well as he does and appears to have these big time strategies, I think, is all going to come crashing down like a house of cards. And what happens when your leadership does not rise to existential crises? The nation declines. And that is what we're looking at between now and 2050 if we continue on this disastrous path.
Well, I will say that I think the Prime Minister has been exceptional on the world stage. The world is watching Canada. The world really is inspired. They think there's a lot of support for him. I'm just thinking, what the hell happened here with this decision? Because, as you say, the House starts to fall apart when you have a rickety minority, when you have politicians who would rather fight in a sandbox than look at the larger threat. They will not give Carney a moment's peace. That's my deepest concern here, is that on the international stage, what he's doing in Finland, what he's doing in Europe, it has been inspiring. The world is watching. They're all Team Canada right now, and we had to go and pick this stupid fight about Northern Gateway. That's my deepest unease right now at this time.
Fair enough. And we have plenty of grist for further conversations. Charlie, thank you very much for this.
Thanks so much for having me on. Thank you.